Admiral Park Ji-hwan stood on the bridge of humanity's last command ship, his hands gripping the metal railing until his knuckles turned white. Through the massive view screen, he watched something that would haunt him forever. The pride of Earth's fleet, over 300 warships armed with humanity's most advanced weapons, were being torn apart like paper in a storm. The enemy wasn't using conventional weapons. The Void Swarm creatures didn't fire missiles or energy beams. Instead, they simply touched the human ships, and metal turned to dust. Steel hulls that had survived asteroid impacts and plasma bombardments crumbled like old leaves. Inside those ships were his friends, his colleagues, people he had served with for decades. Now they were gone, turned to nothing in seconds. Park had been fighting this war for 6 months, ever since the first swarm ships appeared near Pluto. Back then, military. Experts called them just another alien species, maybe hostile but certainly manageable. How wrong they had been. These creatures didn't come from any planet or star system humans knew about. They came from somewhere else entirely, somewhere outside normal reality. Mars had fallen in 3 days. The red planet that humans had spent 2 centuries terraforming became a grey wasteland overnight. The swarm didn't just destroy cities or kill people, they consumed everything, leaving behind empty space where a world used to be. Jupiter's mining stations went silent one by one. Saturn's orbital cities sent desperate final messages before their signals cut to static. Now Earth's orbital defense platforms were failing. Park could see the massive ring of weapons and shields that protected his homeworld flickering like dying light bulbs. Each platform represented decades of human engineering and the hopes of billions of people. The swarm creatures moved through, them like they weren't even there. On the planet below, evacuation ships tried desperately to lift off with refugees. Park watched helplessly as black tendrils reached out from swarm bioships, wrapping around the fleeing vessels. The ships didn't explode or crash. They simply stopped existing, along with everyone inside them. Mothers, children, elderly people, who had lived through humanity's golden age of space exploration, all gone in an instant. The communication channels buzzed with panicked voices from around the solar system. Defense commanders reported the same story everywhere. Conventional weapons were useless, shields provided no protection, and retreat was impossible. The swarm moved faster than light itself, appearing wherever they wanted without warning. Park's aide Lieutenant Kim Seok-jin approached with shaking hands holding a datapad. "Sir, the Joint Chiefs are requesting immediate evacuation to the lunar bunkers," he said, his voice barely steady. Park looked at the young officer and saw his own desperation reflected back. Kim had a family on Earth, a wife and 2 small children. Like everyone else, he was watching his world die and feeling completely powerless to stop it. But Park remembered something from his academy days, a classified briefing about ancient contingency plans. Protocol Omega had always seemed like science fiction, stories about things buried in mountains and sleeping guardians. Now, with extinction staring humanity in the face, even fantasy seemed worth trying. He turned to his communications officer. "Activate Protocol Omega immediately." Dr. Lee Minna had spent her entire career studying ancient mysteries, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. Deep inside Mount Jiri, thousands of feet below the Korean countryside, she stood before 12 massive metal pods that hummed with energy for the first time in 50,000 years. The mountain itself seemed to be waking up around them. The discovery had happened by accident 3 years ago. A mining survey team drilling for rare earth metals had broken through into a vast underground chamber. What they found inside changed everything humans thought they knew about their own history. The chamber was clearly artificial, built with technology that made Earth's most advanced systems look primitive by comparison. Now, with the void swarm consuming everything humanity had built, the government had authorized the unthinkable. Protocol. Omega wasn't just about activating ancient technology. It was about waking up whoever had built it. Minna checked her instruments one more time as the pods began to crack open with sounds like breaking glass. Steam poured out, carrying scents she couldn't identify, something that reminded her of ozone and starlight. Her team of researchers and military personnel stepped back nervously. Nobody knew what to expect. The first figure to emerge was tall and lean, moving with fluid grace despite having been asleep for millennia. His skin was pale as moonlight, and strange symbols seemed to shift and move across his arms like living tattoos. He wore armor made from materials that didn't exist in any periodic table, and carried a weapon that looked more like a piece of crystallized lightning than any gun or sword. When he opened his eyes, Mina felt her breath catch in her throat. They were completely black, not just the pupils but the entire eye, like looking into deep space itself. Those eyes fixed on her with an intelligence that made her feel like a child being examined by a university professor. More figures emerged from the other pods, each one unique but sharing that same otherworldly presence. Some were clearly warriors, their bodies bearing scars from battles fought before human civilization began. Others looked more like scholars or engineers, carrying devices that hummed with contained power. Their leader stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of ages. The words weren't in any language Mina recognized, but somehow she understood their meaning. It was as if the concepts flowed directly into her mind without needing translation. "I am Kang Do-hyun," he said, his gaze sweeping across the modern humans before him. "We are the Eternals, and we have slept too long." His eyes found Mina's, and she saw something there that made her blood run cold. It wasn't anger or confusion at waking up in a strange new world. It was recognition. "The Devourers have returned," he continued, and the temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. "We felt their touch on reality, even in our sleep. Our children have grown, numerous and spread across the stars, but they have forgotten what they were made for." One of Mina's assistants, Dr. Cho Hyun-woo, stepped forward cautiously. "Sir, we don't understand. Who are the Devourers? What do you mean we were made for something?" Kang Do-hyun's expression grew grim as he looked at the modern technology surrounding them, taking in their computers and communication devices with eyes that had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. "You call them the Void Swarm now," he said simply, "and you little ones are our greatest weapon against them." Kang Do-hyun placed his hand on a smooth section of the chamber wall, and suddenly the entire room transformed. The metal surfaces became transparent, showing images that made Dr. Lee Mina's mind struggle to understand what she was seeing. It was like watching a movie, but one that played directly inside her thoughts. The images showed Earth as it had been 50,000 years ago, but it wasn't the primitive world that archaeologists had always described. Instead, massive cities stretched across continents, their spires reaching toward the stars. Flying vehicles moved between buildings that seemed to defy gravity, and the people walking through those ancient streets looked almost human, but not quite. "This was our world," Kang Do-hyun explained, his voice carrying sadness that felt older than mountains. "We called ourselves the Eternals because we thought we would live forever. We had conquered disease, aging, even death itself. Our technology could reshape matter at the atomic level. We traveled between dimensions like you walk between rooms." The images shifted, showing something that made Mina's stomach turn. Black tears appeared in the sky itself, and through them came creatures that hurt to look at directly. They weren't solid like normal living things. Instead, they seemed to exist in several dimensions at once, constantly shifting and changing shape. Where they touched the beautiful eternal cities, everything simply ceased to exist. "The Devourers came from outside reality," Do-hyun continued. "They don't just destroy things, they unmake them, erasing them from existence entirely. Our weapons couldn't touch them because they existed partially in dimensions we couldn't reach. Our shields were useless because they attacked the very concept of matter itself." Dr. Cho Hyun-woo, still trying to process what he was seeing, asked the question everyone was thinking: "How did you fight them? How did you win?" Do-hyun's expression grew darker. "We didn't win, not really. We survived, but only by becoming something we never wanted to be." The images changed again, showing eternal scientists working frantically in vast laboratories. "We studied the Devourers, learned how they worked, and discovered something terrible. The only way to fight them was to create life that existed in multiple dimensions, just like they did." Minna watched in fascination as the images showed the creation of the first humans. But these weren't the primitive cave dwellers from history books. These early humans were magnificent, their bodies capable of things that seemed impossible. They could phase between dimensions, strike at enemies that existed beyond normal space, and most importantly, they could reproduce quickly. "You were our children," Do-hyun said, looking directly at the modern humans in the chamber. "Not in the way parents normally have children, but created specifically to be living weapons. We gave you shortened lifespans so you would value each moment and fight harder. We made you emotional and passionate so you would never give up. We built aggression and protective instincts into your very DNA." The images showed the first war between humans and devourers. It was brutal and desperate, lasting thousands of years. Human armies fought creatures that could barely be seen, using weapons that seemed to bend reality itself. Cities burned, entire continents were consumed, but slowly, impossibly, the humans began to win. "We sealed the dimensional rifts," Do-hyun explained as the images showed massive rituals involving both Eternals and humans. "But we knew they would eventually find another way through. So we went into stasis, waiting for their return, while our human children forgot their true nature and built civilizations of their own." He turned to face Minna directly. "Now the devourers have returned, and humanity has grown soft. But the warrior spirit we built into you still sleeps in your genes. It's time to wake it." Lieutenant Kim Tae-young had thought he knew what pain felt like. He'd been through military boot camp, survived 3 tours fighting rebel colonies, and earned commendations for bravery under fire, but nothing had prepared him for what the Eternals called awakening. The training facility had been built inside Mount Jiri in just 2 weeks, using technology that made human engineering look like children playing with blocks. The walls seemed to shift and change on their own, creating new rooms and corridors as needed. Sometimes Tae-young would walk through a doorway and find himself in a space that was clearly bigger inside than outside, something that should have been impossible. Kang Do-hyun stood before Tae-young's unit of 30 soldiers, his black eyes studying each face with the intensity of someone reading a book. "Your bodies remember what they were made for," he told them in that strange way of speaking that bypassed language entirely. "But 50,000 years of soft living has buried those memories deep. We must dig them out." The first lesson was about seeing. Do-hyun had them stare at what looked like empty air until their eyes began to water. "The devourers exist in several dimensions at once," he explained. "You must learn to see beyond what your limited senses tell you is real." Gradually, impossibly, shapes began to appear in the supposedly empty space, shadowy outlines that moved when nobody was looking directly at them. Tae-young felt his brain trying to reject what his eyes were showing him, but Do-hyun's voice kept him focused. "Now you begin to see as your ancestors did," the Eternal said with something that might have been approval, "but seeing is only the first step." The physical training was unlike anything in human military doctrine. They learned to move in ways that seemed to bend the rules of physics, stepping sideways through dimensions to appear behind targets that should have been out of reach. Sergeant Park Yoon-ji, one of the toughest soldiers Tae-young had ever known, broke down crying during her first dimensional shift. She said it felt like being turned inside out while still remaining conscious. But the hardest part was the genetic activation. The Eternals used devices that looked like crystalline spiders, placing them on the soldiers' necks where they burrowed under the skin. Tae-young screamed for 3 hours straight as the device rewrote his DNA, unlocking abilities that had been sleeping in his cells since birth. When it was over, he could feel the change immediately. His senses were sharper, picking up sounds and smells that hadn't existed before. When he looked in a mirror, his eyes had developed flecks of silver that moved like tiny storms. Most disturbing of all, he found himself thinking about violence in ways that scared him. The protective instincts that had always driven him to defend others had become something hungrier and more dangerous. "You're becoming what you were always meant to be," Do-hyun told him as Tae-young struggled with these new urges. "Your ancestors called it the warrior's awakening. It saved our species once before." Meanwhile, reports from space grew worse each day. Jupiter's moons were disappearing one by one, consumed by the void swarm's endless hunger. Europa, with its underground cities housing millions of people, simply vanished overnight. Ganymede's mining colonies sent a final message before their signals went silent forever. The transformed soldiers watched these reports with expressions that would have terrified their old comrades. Where once they might have felt despair, now they felt only cold determination and a growing hunger for battle that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than thought. Sergeant Choi Soo-bin barely recognized herself in the mirror anymore. The woman, staring back, had silver veins running under translucent skin and eyes that shifted color depending on her mood. Her muscles had become denser, her reflexes faster than any human should be capable of. When she moved, she left afterimages in the air like she was existing in several places at once. The transformation had taken 3 weeks of agony that made childbirth seem like a gentle massage. Her bones had dissolved and reformed, her nervous system had rewired itself, and her brain had grown new sections that processed information in ways she couldn't even describe. The scientists monitoring her progress said she was becoming something unprecedented in human evolution. Now she stood with her unit of 12 transformed soldiers in the abandoned space station orbiting Neptune. Intelligence reports said void. Swarm scouts were using the facility as a staging ground for their advance toward Earth. It would be the first real test of what humanity's hybrid warriors could do. Remember, she told her team over their neural link, a form of communication that had developed naturally after their transformations. We're not just fighting for ourselves anymore. Every human alive is counting on us to prove this works. Private Lee Dong-wook, barely 20 years old before his transformation, flexed claws that had grown from his fingertips. Sergeant, I can smell them from here. It's like burning electricity and rotting starlight. His enhanced senses were picking up traces of the swarm that normal humans couldn't detect. Soo-bin nodded grimly. She could smell them too, along with something else that made her stomach clench with hunger. The predatory instincts the Eternals had awakened were responding to the presence of prey, and she had to fight the urge to simply charge forward and start killing. They moved through the station's corridors like ghosts, their bodies shifting between dimensions to avoid detection. Soo-bin watched her soldiers adapt to their new abilities with disturbing ease. Corporal Kim Min-ho walked through solid walls as if they were made of air. Specialist Yoon So-young's hands crackled with energy that could cut through metal like paper. The first swarm creature they encountered was feeding on the station's power core, its shadowy form flickering between visible and invisible. In the old days, human weapons would have passed right through it without effect, but Soo-bin's transformed unit could see its true form, existing across multiple dimensions simultaneously. "Strike pattern Alpha," she whispered through their neural link, and her soldiers moved like a pack of hunting wolves. They attacked from 6 dimensions at once, their weapons striking at parts of the creature that existed in spaces normal physics couldn't describe. The swarm scout let out a sound like tearing reality before dissolving into nothingness. For the first time since the invasion began, humans had killed one of the Devourers. But victory came with a terrible cost. As soon as the creature died, Soo-bin felt a wave of savage satisfaction wash over her mind. The kill had felt good in ways that frightened her, awakening appetites she didn't want to acknowledge. Around her, she could see her soldiers struggling with the same dark urges. Private Lee was staring at his blood-covered claws with an expression of disturbing pleasure. Corporal Kim was breathing heavily, his eyes dilated like he was experiencing some kind of drug-induced high. The genetic modifications that made them capable of fighting the swarm were also making them more like the predators they hunted. "Control yourselves," Soo-bin ordered, but she could hear the strain in her own voice. The beast they had awakened, inside themselves, was hungry for more violence, more killing, more blood. They had won their first battle against the Void Swarm, but Soo-bin realized they might be losing something far more important in the process. Their humanity was slipping away with every kill, replaced by something older and more dangerous. Captain Yoon Jae-ho floated in the command center of the newly constructed battleship Eternal Dawn, watching Saturn's magnificent rings stretch endlessly before him. The ice and rock fragments that had captivated human astronomers for centuries now served as cover for the largest void swarm nest discovered so far. Intelligence suggested over 50 bioships were hiding among the debris, preparing for their final assault on Earth. Jeho himself had undergone the transformation 6 weeks ago, and the changes still felt alien in his own body. His skin had a metallic sheen that reflected light in impossible colors, and when he concentrated, he could see through the hull of his ship directly into space. Most unsettling of all were the new thoughts that seemed to come from somewhere, deeper than his conscious mind, tactical insights that felt like they belonged to someone else entirely. "All units report ready, Captain," said Commander Shin Hee-jin, her voice carrying the strange harmonic undertones that all transformed humans developed. Her body flickered slightly as she spoke, existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "We have 47 hybrid ships and 300 transformed soldiers ready for deployment." The ships themselves were marvels of combined human and eternal technology. They looked organic rather than mechanical, their hulls seeming to breathe and pulse with their own life. Traditional human weapons had been replaced with devices that could strike across dimensional barriers, finally giving humanity the ability to hurt their enemies. Jeho studied the tactical display showing swarm bioships lurking among Saturn's rings. Each enemy vessel was the size of a small city, their surfaces covered in what looked like living armor that shifted and moved constantly. For months, these creatures had been untouchable, destroying human fleets without taking a single casualty. "Begin the attack pattern," he ordered, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to come from genetic memory. "Remember, we're not just fighting for victory today. We're proving that humanity can evolve." The hybrid ships moved like a school of predatory fish, their hulls phasing between dimensions to avoid the swarm's reality-warping attacks. Jeho watched through his enhanced senses as his forces surrounded the enemy nest, striking from angles that shouldn't have existed in normal space. The first bioship they hit let out a sound like a dying star, its armor cracking under weapons designed to attack multiple dimensions simultaneously. For the first time since the invasion began, human sensors detected swarm blood spilling into space, dark liquid that seemed to absorb light itself. "Impossible," whispered Lieutenant Park Sung-min from the sensor station. "They're actually dying. We're killing them." The battle that followed was unlike anything in human military history. Ships fought while existing in several realities at once, their weapons reaching across dimensional barriers to strike at enemies that flickered in and out of existence. Jeho felt his tactical instincts, enhanced by genetic modifications, working at superhuman speed to coordinate attacks that his old human mind could never have conceived. But victory came with disturbing revelations about what his people were becoming. As each swarm bioship died, Jeho felt waves of savage pleasure wash over his crew. The transformed humans weren't just fighting to defend their species anymore. They were hunting, killing with an enthusiasm that would have horrified their former selves. "Sir, the remaining bioships are retreating," reported Commander Shin, her silver eyes blazing with predatory satisfaction. "They're running from us." Jeho nodded, but felt no satisfaction in their historic victory. Around him, his crew were celebrating with expressions that looked more like wolves after a successful hunt than human soldiers defending their home. The genetic modifications that made victory possible were also erasing the compassion and restraint that had once defined humanity. They had proven they could beat the Void Swarm, but at the cost of becoming something their ancestors might not recognize as human at all. Commander Han So-young stood in the middle of what used to be Seoul's Central Plaza, now transformed into a refugee camp housing over 2 million people. The city had become divided into two distinct zones, the unmodified human sectors and the areas where the transformed lived. The tension between these two groups was becoming impossible to ignore. She watched a group of transformed soldiers walk past, their silver-streaked skin gleaming in the afternoon sun. Normal humans instinctively stepped out of their way, fear written clearly on their faces. The enhanced humans moved with predatory grace, their eyes constantly scanning for threats that only they could see. Even when trying to be friendly, they made everyone around them nervous. "Ma'am, we have another incident in Sector 7, reported Lieutenant Jang Kyung-ho, one of the few unmodified officers still working directly with transformed personnel. His voice carried the strain of someone trying to maintain normalcy in an increasingly abnormal world. 3 enhanced soldiers got into a fight with civilian security. Nobody died this time, but the property damage is extensive. So Young rubbed her temples, feeling a headache building behind her eyes. She had refused the transformation herself, believing that someone needed to remain fully human to bridge the growing gap between the two populations. But that decision was becoming harder to justify as the enhanced humans grew more powerful and more alien with each passing day. The latest batch of transformed humans was particularly disturbing. Their modifications had progressed faster and further than earlier subjects. Some had developed entirely new organs that scientists couldn't identify. Others had begun communicating through methods that bypassed spoken language entirely, sharing thoughts and emotions in ways that excluded unmodified humans completely. Dr. Kim Hae-won, the lead researcher monitoring the transformation process, approached with a data pad full of troubling statistics. "Commander, the psychological evaluations are getting worse. The enhanced subjects are showing decreased empathy for unmodified humans, increased territorial behavior, and what can only be described as hunting instincts. Several have requested permission to patrol civilian areas, claiming they can better protect people, but their brain scans suggest they see normal humans as prey animals. The worst part was that the transformed humans were becoming necessary for survival. Every major victory against the Void Swarm had been achieved by enhanced forces. Normal human technology remained largely useless against an enemy that existed across multiple dimensions. The choice was becoming clear: transform or become extinct. Kang Do-hyun materialized beside them without warning, his ability to phase between dimensions, making normal security measures meaningless. His ancient eyes held a sadness that made So-young's heart ache. "You struggle with the same choice my people faced 50,000 years ago," he said, his voice carrying the weight of eons. "What happened to your people?" So-young asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "We were artists, philosophers, scientists," Do-hyun replied, staring out at the divided city. "We created beauty that could make stones weep and music that could heal broken souls. We spent centuries debating ethics and searching for peaceful solutions to every problem." His expression darkened. "The war against the Devourers changed us. Each battle made us more efficient killers and less capable of the compassion that once defined us." He gestured toward a group of transformed humans training in the distance, their movements deadly and precise. "By the time we achieved victory, we were no longer the species we had fought to protect. We had become something harder, colder, more focused on survival than on the things that made life worth living." So Young watched as enhanced children played games that involved practicing combat techniques, their laughter carrying an edge that made her skin crawl. Is there any way back? Can they become human again? Do-hyun's silence was answer enough. The price of power was becoming clear. Humanity could survive the Void Swarm, but they might lose their humanity in the process. Major Lim Woo-jin watched the sky above Seoul turn black as countless Void Swarm bioships blotted out the sun. This was it, the final battle for Earth's survival. After months of smaller conflicts, the enemy had committed everything to one massive assault that would either destroy humanity completely or break the swarm's power forever. The sight was terrifying and magnificent at the same time. Bioships the size of mountains floated through the atmosphere, their living hulls pulsing with alien energy. Smaller creatures that looked like flying shadows poured from their bellies, heading straight for the planet's major cities. But for the first time since the war began, humanity was ready to meet them. Woo-jin stood in the central command bunker deep beneath the Korean mountains, coordinating the most unusual military force in human history. Regular soldiers with conventional weapons worked alongside transformed humans whose bodies had been redesigned for interdimensional warfare. Ancient Eternals, awakened from 50,000-year sleep, shared tactical information with teenage hackers who had learned to interface directly with alien technology. "All units report ready," announced Sergeant Kim Bo-ra, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones of someone who had undergone partial transformation. Half her face showed normal, human skin, while the other half gleamed with the metallic sheen of enhanced genetics. She represented the compromise many soldiers had chosen, enough modification to fight effectively, but not so much that they lost their humanity entirely. The defense of Earth wasn't happening in just one dimension. Wu Jin could see through enhanced sensors as battles raged across multiple levels of reality simultaneously. In normal space, conventional aircraft and orbital platforms fired everything they had at the swarm bioships. In adjacent dimensions, transformed humans phased through solid matter to strike at enemies that existed partially outside normal physics. "Sir, we have reports from every major city," called out Lieutenant Nam Tai-jun from the communications station. "New York, London, Tokyo, Mumbai, they're all under attack, but the joint forces are holding. The transformed humans are actually working with regular military units instead of treating them like obstacles." That was the miracle Wu Jin had hardly dared hope for. The crisis had forced humanity's two branches back together. Enhanced humans who had begun seeing normal people as inferior suddenly remembered they were fighting to protect their families and friends. Regular soldiers who had feared and resented the transformed realized they needed their enhanced abilities to survive. Admiral Park Ji-hwan's voice crackled over the communication system from his flagship high above the planet. The transformation had only partially taken hold in his older body, leaving him caught between human and something else. "We've located the dimensional nexus," he announced, his words carrying a weight that made everyone in the bunker fall silent. "It's a massive rift in space-time, hidden behind the moon. That's where they're coming from." Wu Jin felt his stomach clench. They had always known this moment would come. Someone would have to lead a direct assault on the swarm's entry point into their reality. It would be a suicide mission requiring someone who could survive the dimensional storms surrounding the rift. "I'm taking a strike force into the Nexus," Park continued. "If we can destabilize it from the inside, we can seal the rift permanently. But once we go in, there's no coming back out." Through the bunker's reinforced windows, Wu Jin could see the battle raging in the sky above Seoul. Transformed humans were fighting side by side with regular soldiers, their different abilities complementing each other in ways that would have seemed impossible just months ago. Children huddled in shelters while their parents, some human, some enhanced, some caught between, fought desperately to give them a future. The unity that Crisis had forged was beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. Humanity had found a way to work together again, but it might be too late to save the world they were all fighting for. Colonel Song Mira stood on the observation deck of the rebuilt lunar station, watching Earth slowly heal from the scars of war. 6 months had passed since Admiral Park's final mission succeeded in sealing the dimensional rift, but the cost of victory still haunted her dreams. The planet below looked peaceful now, its blue oceans and white clouds hiding the massive changes that had transformed human civilization forever. The memorial wall beside her held thousands of names, but the ones that hurt most were the Eternals, who had given everything to save a species they had created 50,000 years ago. Kang Do-hyun had been the last to fall, using his ancient knowledge to help Park's strike team reach the dimensional nexus. His final words, transmitted across space as the rift collapsed, still echoed in Mira's enhanced memory. "Our children have grown strong. We can rest now." Mira touched her own reflection in the window, seeing features that were no longer entirely human. Her eyes held flecks of silver that moved like liquid metal, and her skin had developed a subtle luminescence that became visible in darkness. The transformation had been necessary to survive the final battle, but it had changed her in ways that went far deeper than appearance. "Colonel, the morning briefing is ready," announced Captain Lee Dong-hyun, one of the new generation of enhanced humans who had been born during the war. Unlike the older transformed soldiers, he had never known purely human existence. His abilities were more stable, more integrated, but also more alien. He could phase between dimensions as naturally as walking through a doorway. The briefing room was filled with beings that would have terrified the old humanity. Some were barely recognizable as human anymore, their bodies adapted for existence across multiple dimensions. Others looked normal until they moved, displaying reflexes and awareness that no unmodified human could match. These were the guardians of the New Age, protectors of a species that had evolved beyond its original limitations. Deep space sensors have detected 3 new anomalies, reported Dr. Park Sun-young, her partially transformed features giving her access to types of information that normal instruments couldn't detect. They're not void swarm signatures, but they're definitely not natural phenomena either. Something else is out there watching us. Mira nodded grimly. The victory over the swarm had been decisive, but it had also announced humanity's presence to other cosmic predators. Earth's children had grown strong enough to defeat one ancient enemy, which meant they might be worth the attention of others. "What's the status of the civilian population?" she asked, though she already knew the answer would be complicated. "Integration continues, but slowly," replied Commander Yoon Jae-sung, one of the few completely unmodified humans left in leadership positions. "About 30% of the population has undergone some level of enhancement, mostly voluntary. The pure humans are adapting, but there's still tension in some regions. The hardest part of victory was learning to live with what they had become. Enhanced humans possessed abilities that made them formidable protectors, but also predatory. Instincts that required constant management. Children were being born with genetic modifications that activated naturally, creating a generation that would never know the limitations their grandparents had lived with." Mira looked out at the stars, knowing that humanity's real test was just beginning. They had survived their first encounter with cosmic horror by abandoning their innocence and embracing their capacity for controlled violence. The gentle, curious species that had once dreamed of peaceful contact with alien civilizations was gone forever. In its place stood something harder and more dangerous, apex predators capable of defending themselves against anything the universe might send. The age of humanity as victims was over. The age of humanity as guardians of the galaxy had begun. They would be ready for whatever came next.